Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where we have conversations about how to elevate the quality of life through movement, nutrition, recovery, and mindset practices. Welcome back to another episode of the Greater Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Marshall. Today, super excited to be joined by Steph Roach, a good friend of mine, somebody I've been fortunate enough to know and work with for a couple of years. So, Steph, thanks so much for taking some time to jump on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is so fun. I'm so, first of all, so proud of you for starting this podcast. It's so amazing to be able to listen to the different episodes and, hear all these different stories. So I'm so stoked that you asked me to be on. So thanks so much.
Yeah. I think people are going to really resonate with your story and the way that you help and impact people. And along with that, I love for folks to get a sense of who you are and how you came to be the owner of Staying Driven Fitness, which is just an incredible resource for folks to not only find fitness, but find community. So tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Staying Driven Fitness.
Awesome. Well, my name is Steph Roach, and I have been in the functional fitness space for about 12 years. The beginning of my fitness journey really started with hand cycling and wanting to be a competitive hand cyclist. And I actually used CrossFit as a methodology and just something to get me involved in becoming stronger and being a competitive hand cyclist. Then that really turned into a passion for being a CrossFit athlete and then turning into a CrossFit coach. In 2013, I ended up becoming the world's first female with cerebral palsy to get a level 1 certification, and then went on to better my education and get a level 2 certification. I opened up a CrossFit gym in 2018 and was really enjoying that experience. It was definitely one of the hardest things I'd ever done in my life, but it was rewarding and definitely really challenging, which I'm sure that we can also get into. But when the pandemic happened in 2020, just like everybody's lives and businesses, we were kind of turned upside down. And I remember on March 20th, we were given the notice that we had to close our doors for 2 weeks, quote unquote. And, everybody had that 2-week deadline. Well, when we realized that 2 weeks was turning into 4 weeks, 4 weeks was turning into way longer, we decided to officially close our doors, which was definitely really hard, but it was the right decision for our business. And we decided to pivot from a brick and mortar space into offering fitness on a virtual platform. And that's how Staying Driven Fitness was born. So we are almost exactly 3 years old, which is crazy to think about. And it's been a really fun experience. I learned so much from really operating and kind of failing at the brick and mortar business that the virtual business has been way more successful. So all in all, it was a really big, expensive learning experience. But at the end of the day, it really transferred to success for what was to evolve into a new business.
Yeah, I love the journey of working as an athlete, continuing to get excited and learn about, hey, what are ways I can challenge myself? And then along the way, like you said, you got interested and excited. How do I help other people in the process of figuring out how do we improve their fitness? So I'd love for you to speak on that a little bit of when did you sort of figure out or identify that this idea of coaching and helping people and guiding people was something that was a passion of yours that you really wanted to work towards owning a gym, being a coach, and impacting people's lives day in and day out?
It was a really interesting experience when it happened for me because it was like an aha moment. In 2013, the adaptive community of CrossFit was very small. It was me and, quite honestly, like a bunch of guys. It was like a handful of guys, and we really didn't know what we were all doing or kind of just figuring things out. But I happened to be the only one that was born with my physical disability. So all of the other guys had been paralyzed or had acquired their disability in some traumatic or life-changing injury. And so the perspectives were so different. And I remember understanding that they were all coaches, and one of them owned their own business. But I'm going to go back a little bit. So, my original plan with my life was I graduated college in 2012, and I was going to work for a higher education institution. My ultimate goal was to get my master's degree in higher education and go into housing and residence life. I was super passionate about just being involved in the college community and making sure that students had a really good experience on campus and didn't have to go to the outside world to feel validated for a college experience. I was like very much into like I was a college geek, if you'd like to call it that. I was an activity geek. I was involved in everything, and I actually sat on the board for the housing and residence life for the state of Florida. So it was a really like I was super passionate about it. I really thought that that's where my direction was going to go. And I completed my master's degree, but I have to give credit to one of my professors who, unfortunately, she's passed away now, but her name was Gay Holiday. And she saw that I was really struggling in the idea of separating fitness and then finishing my degree, and I didn't know where I wanted to go. I knew that I loved being involved in the higher education system, but the fitness aspect and the CrossFit aspect was really drawing me like towards it. And so I ended up getting a position at the campus recreation center, and I was one of the first physically challenged individuals to have a position. And then I fought for myself to get a position as a supervisor of the facility. It was 110,000 square feet, and it was a really large, beautiful facility at Nova Southeastern University. And I remember the higher up of the higher up basically was like, she can't do this job. And before I had even really had my interviews, but they had seen my application, the higher ups of the higher ups were saying, I don't think it's safe. I don't think she could do the job well. And you know me, if somebody tells me I can't do something, that's it, right? So like all bets were off. So I had a supervisor above me, and I said, hey, just like give me 3 shifts, give me 3 opportunities to show you that I'm able to do morning, afternoon, and evening closing. And if you don't like what I have to show you, then you can tell me no. But I promise you, like, this is this is what like I really want to be doing and what I'm really passionate about. And I did really well. I had people help me with things that I couldn't reach, and certain buttons that weren't available to my height. And I remember them starting to make some changes so that I could successfully do things. And so it was about like a week of going through trial and error of this position. And the higher up of the higher up came to me and said, I have to apologize because, I was really wrong. And I said, you don't have to apologize. Like, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity. I said, if you wouldn't mind, could we implement these changes so that coming forward, if there's somebody else like me, you don't automatically have to say, I'm really sorry, but I don't think this is safe for you. So once that was like successful, I think people started realizing that my advocacy side and my fitness side were starting to meld together. And so I remember my professor saying to me, hey, if you're super passionate about this, you need to do an internship. And if you want your internship to be unconventional, that's totally fine with me. And she signed off on me being a CrossFit coach at a gym in Virginia. And I moved to Virginia for 4 months. And going long story long, going back to your question, I had seen a person, his name was Jason Sturm, who was an amputee. And I had seen him coaching a class. And I had said, are people actually listening to you? And he starts laughing at me. He's like, of course they are. And I said, if they listen to you, do you think they would listen to me? And he's like, of course they would. right? And I remember saying, man, like I would love to do that someday. And the guy that owned the gym, his name was David Wallach, but everybody called him Chef. And he said, not only are you going to do that someday, you're going to work for me. And that's exactly what I did. And that's how I got my start in wanting to be a coach. So,
It's
long story long.
amazing. Oh yeah, I love hearing the stories for folks of how they've come to find fitness as maybe their own passion, and then they figure out, hey, this has been so meaningful and helpful and inspirational to me. I think I can share this with other people, and to chase down that dream of working and coaching and helping other people. And it looks different for everybody. And it's fortunate that you had some people in your corner supporting you, encouraging you, cheering you on to give you that confidence to move forward. So
Oh, yeah.
you graduated school then, and you had this opportunity to coach. And so what did life look like then after that for you? So you had somebody who believed in you, and how did you move from internship in Virginia to gym owner in
Yeah.
North Carolina and now staying driven? Like, what did that journey look like?
Oh, that journey was tough, man, and there's so many pieces in between. But I will say, I was a horrible coach, and I'm the first to admit it. I was a horrible, horrible coach, and not because I didn't believe in myself or I didn't want to help people. I was regurgitating everything that I either heard from somebody or that I had learned on my level 1 and then level 2 course. And the moment that I started realizing that I didn't have to fit this cookie cutter mold of teaching a certain movement a certain way, because there's certain movements that I physically will never be able to feel in my life, right? So if somebody wants to learn how to do a muscle up, you can tell them, hey, this is how it feels at this point. This is how you're supposed to feel with your hands. This is how it's supposed to feel with your hips. This is how it's supposed to feel when you press all the way at the top. There's certain things that I never physically understood. And so there was a really big aha moment when I taught my first athlete to successfully do a double under. And it clicked for me, and I had to pretend on the outside, like, oh yeah, I knew what I was doing, but on the inside, I was like, hell yeah, like I totally taught that dude how to do that. But the way that I taught it was not very conventional. I used things like analogies like Tigger and how does Tigger jump, right? Tigger jumps using his tail and the spring on his tail. So your toes, there are Tigger springs on the bottom of your toes. And like your hands, you've got to move with those snappy wrists. A snappy wrist is a happy wrist. And like as silly as those things were, it was working, right? And so as soon as I started getting out of my own way and allowing my pride to like be on the side, I started making less mistakes and creating a new playbook for myself. Now, that's not to say that I'm a perfect coach and I still don't make mistakes 12 years later, but at the end of the day, like understanding that your level 1 and your level 2 courses are just foundational and not foundational in material, but just foundational for the way that you coach, right? The way that I coach versus the way you coach is probably similar, but it's also very different, right? And so at the end of the day, you kind of have to work with what works best for you. I always tell all of our coaches with Staying Driven, you're not me. As much as like, we have this specific way of coaching a class and keeping it within the hour, you don't have to talk like me. You don't have to move like me. You don't even have to play the same music that I play, right? You get to be your own coach as long as our foundation is the same and the athletes are moving safely and they're getting a good workout in. That's all I care about, you know?
Yeah, and the things that I appreciate about that perspective too is that there's so many different ways to work with people and help people to get to the outcome that maybe they're hoping to get to, whether that's to learn a specific movement like a double under with the jump rope or a muscle up, or hey, I'm just trying to feel a little bit better so I can move around easier
Yeah.
and try and be happy with maybe the way I look or the way I interact with others. And it looks so different for different folks. And that's what I love about all the different populations and people we get a chance to work with, is that there's no one size fits all for being a coach or how somebody's supposed to work out or things like that. And I know for me, that was a big learning experience, having the opportunity to work with you and staying driven. Is you hear terms like disability, adaptive athletes, and working within that population, it's a little bit different than working with what I come to understand to be able-bodied athletes. So
Yeah.
maybe it'd be helpful to help educate some of our listeners on that too. When you hear the term adaptive athletes, like what does that mean? Like what does that translate to in terms of
Yeah.
working and coaching with folks?
It's funny because Ty and I actually just had this conversation this morning. My grandpa's 85, and I love him dearly. He's, one of the greatest people that I know in my life. But you have to understand that somebody that's 85 is going to have a different perspective of what a disability is versus what we know now, right? And so when you talk about disability in the terms of 2023, disabilities can look so different for people. Disabilities can be visible, disabilities can be invisible, and people can move differently, people can talk differently, communicate differently. And back when my grandparents were growing up, people like myself and people in the adaptive community, they were just sent into homes. They were put in institutions because people didn't know what to do with us, right? And so as we've evolved in just society in general, the idea of the term disability, and I don't use it very often, and that's why I like using the term adaptive or adaptive athlete, is because if you look at the term disability, it's literally telling you what people can't do, right? Whereas when you are adapting, you are changing the situation for your own circumstance. And that's what we do every day, right? We don't know who's going to hop onto class and who may jump in for the first time and who's been doing it for 3 years. And at the end of the day, you have to be able to physically adapt your perspective to open up to the person around you, right? And I think when people hear the term disability, they automatically go to a negative. But at the end of the day, when you really look into the adaptive community, it's all about different perspective, right? People are living from a different perspective. Imagine if I told you, I wanted you to look over a fence, right? I wanted you to tell me what was over the fence. So you stood up and you could look over the fence. But if somebody can't look over that fence and you ask them what's in front of them, they're going to give you a different perspective, right? So it's kind of like, just because you have a physical disability or developmental or invisible, whichever you want to call it, it's not necessarily a negative thing. And I think that's where the adaptive side is becoming more empowering. I think there are some people and there are disability advocates that are like, you need to own the term disability. It's not a bad word. And I'm not saying it is, but I think for me personally, the empowerment really comes from changing the narrative of, just because I have a physical disability doesn't mean I can't do XYZ. It just might look a little different.
Yeah, that was a huge perception shift for me. And I really appreciate the way you speak in metaphors and things like that to help give us a visual of it, of, hey, I've got folks in front of me, and yeah, I might have learned from my training of a movement should look a certain way. You're going to press overhead. You're going to pick something off the ground a certain way. And now you have somebody in front of you who maybe it's going to look different, or they can't move certain body parts in that way. And now it's, okay, let's shift how we coach them. Doesn't mean they don't have access to fitness. Doesn't mean they don't have access to all the same things we do. Just looks different. And you work with that and bringing some curiosity and asking questions and working from that perspective is really, really important as coaches. And it's been one of the beautiful things that I've learned and been very grateful for working with the Staying Driven community. And so when we start to look at this perspective of, regardless of what your ability levels are, regardless of adaptive or not. One of the things we're really passionate about is this idea of quality of life and how we can try and elevate that for people, because we think,
Yeah.
everybody should have access to the ability to thrive. And so when you think about the idea or this concept of quality of life, what does that mean for you? Or maybe how would you define it, or how do you wrap your mind around that idea, especially as a coach in the fitness community who gets a chance to work with people every single day?
Yeah. You know, and I know you know his name, and people that are listening will not know who he is. But when you think about Chemo, right? Chemo is one of our athletes, and when Chemo first started with us 3 years ago, he was simply just laying in his bed, not doing much of a workout. He was moving his arms as much as he could, and then something really incredible started happening. You started seeing him sit up, and you started seeing him sit up in his chair. You started seeing him show up to class in his chair. And so, not to say that he does it all the time, but to know that that's an actual possibility, to take somebody from a lying down position to now where they feel more comfortable sitting up, and they feel more comfortable and stable doing a workout sitting up, that's proof positive of quality of life, right? And at the end of the day, you have to think about, why do we all do fitness in the first place? It doesn't matter if we're running or we're walking or we're on a bike. Do you remember the workout that the three of us did, you, me, and Emily? And it was really dumb because we did it in like the hottest day of the year.
120-degree heat outside in Arizona. Yes.
End of the day, like we started that clock 3, 2, 1, go, and at the end of the workout, we all felt the same way, regardless of how we were moving, right? And so I think that's the beauty of fitness when it comes to your quality of life and why people do it. It doesn't matter if you do CrossFit, if you do Peloton, if you're going for a walk, or if you're doing jazzercise. I don't really care. As long as you're doing something for your own betterment of yourself, then good on you, And I think that's the important part, especially when you do have a physical disability, because I think also another perspective that people project onto the disability community or adaptive community is that we have like an unspoken, or people think we have this unspoken, like, different lifespan. And it's not always true. Not all physical disabilities are degenerative or progressive. Things are progressive. Like I always tell people, if you sit on your butt and do nothing your entire life, that's not a quality of life. Whether you're able-bodied or not, that's not a quality of life. So if you're going to sit down and do nothing for the rest of your life, wherever you are in the world, you're going to progressively go downhill. But I think this idea that adaptive athletes and people in the disability community can be strong, right? I love when people come up to me and they're like, "Oh man, you look strong," right? Because the other side of the coin is, "Oh man, I feel so bad for you. If I was in your position, I wouldn't be able to do it." And it's like, you don't know that, because like, this is the only life I've ever known. And sometimes you're going to meet people, this is the only life they've ever known. And sometimes you're going to meet people who you might have seen walking 20 years ago, and right now they're not. And at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that there's such a negative stigma about living in this community that, like, that's why I try so hard every day to be like, it's not that bad. Like, you can still live your life and do whatever you want to do, but quality of life is so important, and that's where the fitness side of things comes in. I don't know if we were going to touch on this, but I think it is important to talk about. I'm a 6-year cancer survivor, and I remember walking into my doctor's office, and it was like 5 days after they had like inserted the port in my body, and she'd given me 5 days and said, "You can't work out until after the 5 days." So on the 6th day, I went into her office. I showed her a video of me doing a power clean. And I looked at her and I said, I know you don't understand this, but is it okay if I do this? And she looked at me and she said, sure, but I don't know why you'd want to. And she was joking, like, I don't know why anybody would want to do that. And I said, you have to understand that this is what's going to keep me alive. I said, it's my family, my friends, the love around me, but this is also what's going to keep me sane and keep me alive. And I remember it was the 7th week of going through treatment, and I had one scan, the first scan that you go through after finding out that you initially have the cancer. You do this one scan, and normally the scan might come back somewhat clean, but she told me don't have too high expectations that it's going to come back completely clean. So 7 weeks, go into her office, and she said, I've never seen anything like you before in my life. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, your scan is completely clean. Like, you are textbook, what they call in remission, and so I asked her, I said, so do we have to finish anymore? Like, is it done? And because I still had to do, 6 months of chemo or whatever. And she said, we still have to finish the treatment because that's the point, but what you've done is incredible. And she really attributed me being as fit as I was to how healthy my body was fighting, and like how hard it was fighting for me to be healthy. So yeah, I think fitness is a huge part of your quality of life and why that's so important.
Yeah, a few of the things you said there that really resonate with me is one, the perception or how you define quality of life. If it's the ability to sit up in bed, if it's the ability to connect and work out with other folks, if it's the ability to play with your kids, or when you have friends come visit in town, you can go do a workout together. That might be your quality of life. And then the other thing that you said there at the end that I think sometimes we miss out on is really this idea that if we're fitter, stronger, healthier, etc., we're harder to kill. You think about it, and some people talk about that of just like it allows you to be challenged and be resilient and face different things physically that are tough. And our fitness level or our health definitely is a buffer against that. And it's your story highlights that. And I know we've heard it from other folks as well. Hey, something happened, couldn't plan for it, couldn't anticipate it, but the doctor said my health helped me navigate that scenario just a little bit better. And, so that ability to improve quality of life through movement, through our perspective, through the way that we have relationships, like you said, all makes a huge difference in the way that we live our lives and the way that, we can enjoy that life. And one of the things that I think you get excited about, and I know I get excited about as well, is our ability to coach and impact other people's lives. And so I'd love to hear from you when you think about how you coach and impact other people's lives. What are the things that you get most excited about, or what are the things that really drive you to want to continue coaching and working in the space?
Yeah, so I think it's a twofold. So when I was working primarily with able-bodied people, it was such a sense of pride to see people react to their successes, and me still being who I am, right? And so I would have, these big, like, lineman looking guys come into my gym, and they'd be like, oh, that's my coach. And people that have never been into the gym before would be like, oh, this girl in a wheelchair, like, what's she going to teach you, kind of thing. But I say, give me like 5 minutes and I'll be able to show you that what I know is right. And so when I worked primarily with able-bodied people, it was a different perspective because I felt like I was constantly proving something to somebody. And it wasn't like I felt like I had to prove something, but it was like, oh man, like this girl really knows what she's doing, right? Whereas now we're in the adaptive space. And I'm not saying that we don't work also with able-bodied people, but the majority of our clientele is now adaptive. And I get so much excitement and so much happiness from hearing things like, hey, guess what? When I was doing laundry the other day, I didn't fall over. Or like, hey, I grabbed something from the fridge the other day and I didn't have to ask anyone to help. I brought the dog food in the other day and I was able to lift it all by myself. And so, like, those things are different, but they're also the same. It's the same feeling of like, man, this is really working. What we're doing is actually helping people. And I was really scared, and I'm not one to shy away from this anymore because I've talked about it so much. I really I opened up about it when I wrote about it in my book. I was really, really, really afraid to involve myself deeply in the adaptive community. There was so much shame surrounding being part of the disability community and adaptive community when I was growing up that, I was just supposed to always be, oh, you're so lucky that you have all your looks about you and your communication skills. And it was constantly like, not that I was supposed to be better, but that I didn't have to struggle as much as somebody else from somebody's perspective. And so for so long, I shoved myself so far away from the adaptive community that I wanted nothing to do with anyone. Like if you used a wheelchair, I wanted nothing to do with you. If you had cerebral palsy, especially boys, like I wanted nothing to do with you because everybody wanted to always piece us together. Everybody always wanted to be like, oh, you'll date somebody and don't worry, you'll find a good guy with CP and he'll understand. And like that just like drove my fire to be like, oh hell no, I'm not feeding into that perspective. But it really changed when I got deeper involved in the adaptive CrossFit space, and I learned that you can use a wheelchair and use accessibility devices and you can be strong as hell, right? And you can still do things and people will have this perspective where they're not looking down on you. And so I'm so glad that I kind of got out of my own way because I had lost so many years and probably so many opportunities to connect more with people who are actually like me. But now with staying driven, I get to watch things from a different perspective. I get to watch somebody like you who'd never worked with an adaptive athlete in their life to now coaching like it's something you do, your entire life and something you're so confident about. And that's not my physical doing. I'm not like a puppeteer, moving you around doing your own thing. You went through it and you learned like, hey, this isn't so scary. All these people are still the same, right? And so at the end of the day, like that's where I find so much joy is like seeing the growth in not only the people, but also the coaches that are part of our business. Because a lot of them have never even been coaches before, which was really cool, right? And so now you're having coaches that are able-bodied coaching adaptive athletes, and then you're having adaptive athletes that have never been coaches before coaching full classes. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's one thing I've come to know about you is that you're not somebody who wants to be put into a box. It's like, hey, I know you might see me a certain way. I know you might think about me a certain way, but I'm going to shatter whatever expectations that you have for me or what's possible. And I can see the joy that you get when you do that for other people of, hey, you might have perspectives on yourself. You might put yourself in this box and I'm going to find ways to help you unlock that or get outside of it and do more than you think you can, work with people you never thought you could, work with a population as a coach if you never even saw yourself as a coach. So that excitement you get from helping other people to get outside of their own way, break through those boxes they might put them in, that sounds like that's where the most exciting part of your job comes into play.
Well, and I think too, it also must translate into your gym as well, right? Whereas now you're having somebody come in who might have injured their knee, or might have, have something where they can't use their shoulders right now. You can have seated athletes versus standing athletes. It's not that hard to literally take the movement pattern and switch it up, and I
Mhm.
think that's really cool to watch also is staying driven's not, uh, it's not unique, right? It's not like, yes, we are doing it in a way that seems unique, but it's not this thing that's like, oh, you can't touch it, right? It's everybody should have the knowledge to be able to feel comfortable saying, hey, I've used this example a lot. If you have somebody that is 300 plus pounds and they're coming to you saying, I want to better my quality of life, you're never going to look at them and be like, nope, can't come in my gym, right? But you're also not going to send them on a 400-meter run at an 80% pace. You're just not going to do that. So in that mindset, that person that is first day in your gym, 300 plus pounds, you're going to do what? You're going to adapt for them. They are your adaptive athlete, right? They are your scaled athlete, whatever you want to call it. But you're taking what is considered your RX movement or your prescribed movement for the day, and you're changing it for their needs. People, I think it's so interesting that people will look at that and see it one way. But then when you use a wheelchair or you use an accessibility device, it's like they forget that those things are two and the same. Yeah, And so I think that's what's really cool about staying driven is like you kind of forget that people use these accessibility devices and they're just athletes, you know?
Absolutely. I know for me personally, I feel like it's unlocked new levels of coaching, of understanding variations of movements, different types of movements. I've even taken movements I've learned from the programming and staying driven and putting them into some of our gym workouts. Or somebody comes in and we just had this happen where somebody had shoulder surgery. So you're like, I'm pretty good with knowing what to do with
Yeah.
people who maybe can't use one part of their body, and we can still make sure you're getting some great fitness in, and it's not just, hey, I can't move for the next 6 months. It's like, no, you're gonna move just fine and we'll take care of you. So it certainly is helpful for that. And I do agree that like just modifying is really the same thing as adapting, whether it's changing the weight, changing the movement, changing what you're doing. It's all the same. We're still moving, we're still improving and moving the needle, just looks a little different, which I think is a really important concept as well for a lot of coaches to understand and working with any type of population. And along those lines of, think about how much excitement we get from working with other folks. I know you are somebody who's very caring, concerned about your own, quality of life. And we always like to hear from coaches and folks out there of like, what are the practices or what are the things that you like to do? I think sometimes you look at a coach and like, oh, all they do is work out or whatnot, but there's so much
Definitely
more.
not.
Yeah, right. There's so much more to it than just, being able to get an hour of fitness in or whatever that is. So I'm just curious to hear from you, like outside of working out or whatever else, what are some of the practices or things you like to do that make you feel like, hey, I'm enjoying the quality of life that I'm afforded by, these practices?
Yeah, and I'm also not one to shy away from telling people when I struggle. And I have, for probably the last 3 years, really been trying to understand my own space, my own, like where I fit in the world kind of thing. And I go, from depressive episodes to trying to figure out how to climb out of those. And I think one thing that I realized when I was physically owning the brick and mortar gym, yes, you have all this equipment around you and available to you, but when you're working literally from sun up to sun down, the last thing you want to do is really get a workout in, unfortunately. And so I think the perspective that gym owners are just, in the gym working out all the time is something that is like, absolutely not. I think personally for me, this is actually a great week to talk about this. I've spent the last probably 6 days making sure that I force myself to do at least 45 to an hour of movement, and using our staying driven community as like accountability partners, and like people will check in on me because I don't think people realize like how much of a mental struggle it can be when your your body changes so much from something you can't control to then having to try to fix it all the time and feeling like you're not good enough, feeling like, you're in this fitness space, but you don't have six pack abs, but you feel really strong, but you're and this perspective of, oh man, she teaches fitness, and so I think it kind of plays in my head a lot of like, am I doing enough, am I enough, like am I in the right space, and so I really struggle, and I have struggled for a long time, of just kind of figuring out where that passion is again, and so for the last like 6 days, I know it doesn't seem like a lot, and I go through these cycles. I mean, you and I have talked personally, and I go through these cycles of being really good and then being really just not good, and trying to find the balance of where it is to just kind of feel okay for a hot minute. And so I think that the perception that just because you own something that revolves around fitness doesn't mean you're always taking care of yourself. And so I
Hmm.
think that's also really important to talk about, because I think, especially when you look on social media, everybody's lying on social media. Not everything is perfect. Not everything is a PR every day. Not everything is just highlight reel. And especially when you have this following of people wanting you to be inspirational all the time, it's disappointing when you don't feel inspirational. So what I'm trying to do for myself is just try to climb back out, and it's not perfect, but at the end of the day, it's human, right? So,
Yeah, and I think that's so relatable to all of us is that there's just these ebbs and flows, and some of it we can't control. You can't always control what the work schedule is going to look like, or what family's going to do, or what certain relationships are, how they're going to unfold. And having different practices, whether it's getting a little bit of movement in, like you said, or whether it's eating a certain way or trying to sleep, like we do the best we can with what we're being given. And it might mean that we're not going to hit those PRs and those really high moments all the time. And it might mean, you know what, I walked for 15 minutes today. And
yeah.
is that something worth posting on Instagram? I don't know, but like it helped me get through the day. And
Yeah.
to celebrate those small wins and encourage folks that like that is the name of the game. We're not as exciting and cool as it is to achieve a first movement or lift a certain weight or feel really strong. We know that we really care more about the consistency of like, can we just keep showing up day in and day out, knowing that that might be something that helps us when those low moments do come, because they're challenging and it can challenge us and how we think about ourselves. And so for you, it sounds like movement is a big piece of that. Are there any other big pieces as you kind of continued on the journey here of things that you're like, you know what, if I include these things in my day, whether it's conversations or dates with my husband or whatever else, that you're like, this really does help me when I think about it?
Yeah, I think too, like, I mean, I have the greatest support system in the world when it comes to Ty, and what he what he deals with behind closed doors is not, always the easiest, and it's not sunshine and rainbows all the time. But at the end of the day, like he always tells me, and in the last couple of weeks, one thing that he's been like driving home to me is that like I will always win. Right? In his book, to him, I will always win. If he has something to do but I'm not doing okay, he will drop what he's doing to make sure that I'm doing okay. Right? And so like I'm very lucky to have that in my corner, and I know that. But I think too it's like nutrition is important, right? And it doesn't have to be perfect. But when you cut out the sugars and you cut out, the things that literally just are making you feel so weighed down. I'm not a nutritionist, but I've been around this a long time, and I've been, I one of the things that I dive into is I'm an emotional eater. I'm a binge eater when I'm, really sad or just really stressed out. And so, again, you and I have talked about this, but just being able to recognize, like, oh, like I'm not doing okay. Like and there's a certain point where like I would never judge anybody for the size of their body because I would never want to be judged. But I know for me, if I have a heavier sized body, it's harder for me to physically move, right? Talking about quality of life, having to transfer, having to walk around on my crutches, having more weight on my body makes it harder for me to do things physically, right? And so there will come tipping points where I'll be like, oh man, I got to get back on my shit, right? And then it turns around pretty quickly. But just because you have the knowledge doesn't mean that you're always implementing it in your own life. And so that's something where I think the self-awareness is important, and kind of pulling yourself out of that and realizing like it's okay to be there, but you can't stay there forever because it's not going to be good.
100%. And that's one of the things I've always appreciated about diving into and learning more about the coaching space is that we have so much information and education at our fingertips now. Like if you want to learn a certain way to eat or how much to eat or how to move or which ways to move, like you can Google and YouTube just about anything and you can figure out some pretty good traits and characteristics and practices, but that doesn't mean you're going to actually execute on them. And that's why having coaching and having a community is so important. And one of the things I think, you and I both realize of why we love doing what we do is because the community, the accountability, all of that plays a huge factor in people's ability to stay consistent. And so in working with folks over the years, there's certain practices that you've come to appreciate. When you're working with new athletes or new folks within the Staying Driven community, are there certain things that you try to impress upon them in terms of, hey, let's try and incorporate this into your day-to-day or some different practices or things that you've seen be really helpful for moving the needle or making them feel a little bit better, move a little bit better, or just maybe enjoying life a little bit more?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned very early on as a coach, and then as a business owner, when you're trying to sell people on your space and what you're doing, people aren't going to see results if they go to the gym once a week and that's it, right? If you go to the gym once a month, you're not going to see the same results as if you would be twice a week, 3 times a week. So I always tell somebody that's starting brand new that if you want a baseline for where you're at, try for 3 times a week. And if you do that for 3 weeks in a row and you feel like you can do 4 times a week, awesome. You know what I'm saying? And kind of going off of that parameter. But you never want to push somebody to a point of breaking them, but you want to push somebody to a point of challenging them because that's why people are paying for a service, right? I'll hear from people all the time, I love Staying Driven because I just can't do this alone. And I like being able to have the community to push me. I like being able to be accountable for, putting my stuff in Sugar Watt or putting my scores down and having somebody give me some feedback on that. So just knowing that, like, if you show up, we're going to show up for you, if that makes sense.
Oh, I absolutely love that perspective. And that's the thing is those days where you don't feel motivated, you don't really feel like doing it, and you log on and you jump in and you see there's a couple other folks in there and coach has got a smiling face and there's a workout that's already taken care of and programmed for you. All you have to do is show up. It makes it easy. And then you're like, hey, let's just do this a couple days a week, right? Let's just see if we can click log in, jump in, take class, and we'll see if we notice some of those benefits and those differences over time just by jumping in a couple times a week to start. And then you slowly progress from there. So don't jump in the deep end and feel like you got to change everything about your life in one day. Let's make small baby steps here and see what that might do for us. And know that there's going to be some challenge there too. It's not going to be the easiest workout of your life when you're like, wait, you want me to move for 20 straight minutes and do these 5 different movements? Like, yeah, we believe you. We know you can do it. Like,
we got you.
Oh, I absolutely love that. Yeah. Some workouts we build in a minute of rest and other ones, sorry, you get to rest on your own or you just keep moving.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's so important too, that perspective of just start small, start easy, and just notice what some of those benefits or differences might be. One of the things that we get really excited about when talking with different folks is what are some of the like principles or sort of guiding things that influence the way like you think or make decisions or work with folks? We kind of have this model with greater culture of like people have a purpose, or they may be tuned into that purpose of like, hey, here's something that I'm really passionate about or really drives me. They've got these principles that sort of govern their decisions and how they think about things. They got practices. I like to move, I like to eat a certain way. So we always like to hear from, the coaches and other folks we have on the podcast of, are there certain principles or sort of guiding things that influence the way that you think about working with other people, or decisions that you make in your own life, or things that have just kind of stood out to you over time?
Empathy.
Mm.
1,000%, just having empathy for humans and where they are at in their lives, because literally everybody struggles with something. And I think the world would be a much better place if we had less criticism and more empathy, right? And just because you choose to move a certain way, or you choose to do something differently, doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It might not be what you and I choose for our own life, but having this sense of empathy to realize that, you understand what somebody's going through, or you try your best to put yourselves in their shoes. And I'm not a perfect person, but I will say that I have a heightened level of empathy that sometimes I wish I could turn off because it's a lot. But I also just think that the world needs more of it. People need grace in their life. People just need somebody to say, "Hey, you're doing a good job. Like, how you doing?" And so I think that's something that just guides me in a general direction in life. And just being more open-minded, because I know that I spent so many years being so closed-minded to people that were so similar to me, that I just try to not forget that, because it will always be part of who I was and part of my life, but try to learn from it and move forward in a better direction.
Yeah, I really connect with both of those. Makes sense why, we've connected, but the idea of empathy, of treating each person, individually, of let's see if I can meet them where they're at. Let's see if we can work together to figure out the path forward. And then curiosity of, can I be open-minded? Can I try different things or see a situation in a new way? And those two combined can, like you said, hopefully make things a little bit better, make us feel like we're connecting with people, moving people forward, improving their quality of life, which are always really important concepts. So I really appreciate those. And I definitely resonate with both the empathy and the curiosity perspective. Now, one of the things we know about you, Steph, is you wrote a book. And so I'd love for you to give us a little overview. I've personally read it. I absolutely loved it. But for folks out there who are maybe interested, tell us a little bit about the book, whether it's the process of it, what it's about, or how folks might be able to get their hands on a copy to learn a little bit more about you and your story.
Thank you so much. I can't even believe that I'm saying this, but at 33, I wrote a memoir, and it was just something that I've been wanting to do for quite a long time. I've always wanted to write a book. I had no idea if my story would resonate with as many people as it is. When I was 8 years old, I decided that I wanted to be part of Oprah's book club. So that was kind of like my guiding force in life. But it took me about 2.5 years to do. A little bit longer than I would have liked, but there are parts of the story that are very sensitive, and just took me a long time to be able to feel like I was ready to put out into the world. It's called Driven, and it's just the story of my life up until this point, and kind of where life has taken me from all different points in life, from being a little girl to navigating what it was like to grow up in this able-bodied world, and then truly starting to accept who I was as the person that I am now. So it's a pretty cool story, if I do say so myself, and it's a pretty easy read from what I'm hearing from people. So I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, I certainly found it to be a page turner, where the ability to connect the stories and how that impacted or led to the path that you took, and then seeing all of the pieces come together for the title of the book of being driven, like we said, not putting yourself in a box, always feeling like you can break out of that and accomplish things that are meaningful and important to you and overcome challenges along the way. I really enjoyed the book, and I encourage anyone out there to get your hands on a copy and take a read, because it's a good one. So for folks who are also interested in connecting with you, what are some of the best ways to connect with you, whether that's social media or learn a little bit more about staying driven? How can folks learn more about you?
Yeah. So if anybody wants to follow me on social media, all of my platforms are the same. It's Steph the Hammer. It's one word on any and all social media. If people want to follow Staying Driven, they can always follow at Staying Driven Fitness. And if people want to check out our website, it is www.stayingdrivenlive.com. So any and all ways to get in contact with me, I would love to chat with you.
Yeah. And I think maybe the last piece then is, when you look at Staying Driven, a virtual community, maybe give people just a quick overview of what that looks like. So if you're somebody who's interested in joining a fitness community that meets through Zoom with instructor and coach led classes, just give us a little overview of what's the Staying Driven community look like if you were interested in joining in the workouts.
Yeah, so the Staying Driven community is an incredible group of people who come together. I would say 95% of our population is adaptive, but that doesn't mean that anyone can't join. It's fitness with you in mind is our tagline. And that's really what it is. It's a 1 hour experience. We decided that you don't need four walls and a whiteboard to be a successful fitness experience. We still do the whiteboard meetups virtually, and it's been an incredible experience. We meet you exactly where you're at. So if you have weights, don't have weights. If you have bottles of water that you want to use as your weights, you can use those too. But our community comes with absolutely no judgment. Everybody, we just kind of meet you where you're at, and it's a 1 hour experience. We offer classes 5 days a week, and then once on Saturdays, 4 times a day throughout the week. So it's pretty cool. We got a ton of different options for people to choose from, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah, and you probably will see either myself or mainly Steph and a couple other awesome coaches on there. So it is a really, really cool community with some incredible coaches who are delivering a great product to folks who want to get a little movement in and do it from the comfort of their own home, but still have that community atmosphere. So can't recommend it enough for folks out there. Well,
Thanks.
Steph, I want to say thanks so much for taking some time to hop on the podcast today. Always love the opportunities we get to catch up and connect. Love hearing more about your story and how you think about elevating the quality of life of other people, and how you've done it in a variety of ways over the years, and how Staying Driven is helping people do that day in and day out. So thanks so much for taking some time to hop on for the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was so fun, and I hope you all enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see you soon.